Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Duru from Ahan Analytics with the market breadth. All right, before we dive in, just want to give you a quick reminder. Please like and share this content so the algorithm knows what's up. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, put them down below. And of course, if you want more content like this, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. All right, let's dive into my search for the reasons to hold AMD. So I'm going to go through a few steps on this search for reasons to hold AMD. I'm going to describe to you very quickly the price setup that triggered this search. I'm going to discuss the details of the deal because that's very important, of course. That's what was the catalyst for the big price rise. Look at the valuation. Again, look, I'm trying to find reasons to sell. So is the valuation too high? And then I'm going to go into the technicals of the stock and conclude at the end that yes, I want to keep holding AMD shares here. Okay, let's look at the price setup. Now, in the technical setup, I'm going to describe the details. I'm going to zoom in and really explain what's going on here. But I just want to show this overview that AMD has had a monster run since the lows of April. And I was lamenting to my readers about a month ago that AMD had finally cooled off and broken down below a key technical line, which is the 50-day moving average, which is that red line, and I was wondering whether it was just time to, call it quits. But I said, nope, I'm going to stick to the long term. And a month later, I was rewarded, and other of us AMD shareholders were rewarded with the big OpenAI deal. All right, let's OpenAI deal. So let's look into the details of that deal now. So on the hold side, I have favorable momentum. That's very easy. The stock is going up and just hold. But on the sell side, and this is what I was looking for, I was examining the valuation and the deal details. Are there reasons in the footnotes, in the finer print, to tell me that, oh, actually, it's time to just close up shop and take profits? Well, the details are great on the surface. Right here, AMD announced, along with OpenAI, that it's going to deploy 6 gigawatts of AMD GPUs on a multi-year, multi-generation agreement. That means it's going to last several years, and it's going to go across generations of technology. But the weird thing is, not the weird thing, but the things that are kind of a little fuzzy, for instance, this deployment is not even going to start for another year in the second half of 2026. And that's just starting. We don't know when that first deployment will end. We don't even know how many years it will take to get through the deployment of all these 6 gigawatts. Moreover, the announcement, and I looked at the SEC filing, what's called an 8K. I also read through that, and nowhere do these companies announce how much revenue OpenAI is going to pay AMD for this deployment. And that missing number is important because as a part of this deal, they did disclose that AMD is giving away 10% of the company. Why do I say giving away? Well, AMD is giving a warrant, what's called a warrant to OpenAI. So it gives them the right to purchase shares, and that right comes with a 1 penny per share price tag. So OpenAI only has to spend 1 penny per share to get 10% of the company. Now, the only reason why this wasn't immediately dilutive to current shareholders is that there is a vesting schedule. So, for instance, OpenAI cannot start to exercise their warrants for another 5 years. Also, there is a scaling. Now, again, we're short on details, but there's a final threshold where OpenAI cannot exercise unless AMD's shares reach $600 per share. So that means that the typical dilutive effect of these warrants is greatly minimized because OpenAI can't even exercise them until the stock hits certain higher prices. Now, we don't know what other thresholds exist. We just know that there are several thresholds between the current price, which is now 236. The pre-deal price was around 165 and $600. So I just put some question marks. It could be 300, it could be 400. We don't know. But there is a message here in this escalating vesting schedule, and that is both partners in this deal expect AMD's share price to be much higher. And that should be encouraging to those of us who are holding AMD shares. All right, so the next thing, so that's the deal details. Let's look into the valuation. Valuation is also a little fuzzy in terms of a reason to hold. This is from Seeking Alpha. They have their quant factor grades, and the valuation, unfortunately, that they give for AMD is almost bottom of the barrel D plus. At least it's not as bad as the F that NVIDIA got. NVIDIA is a sister company to AMD and is, of course, the big king of semiconductors in AI. And fortunately, the other quant factor grades, the growth, the profitability, and momentum are all green, A's and A minuses, and on par with NVIDIA. So I'm all good with the rest of that. But still, the valuation D plus, not so great. So why is it a D plus? Well, there's lots of details here. AMD actually has a higher valuation than NVIDIA in many ways, except the key thing that I want to see, price to sales. And AMD's price to sales ratio is very high for a hardware company. I think typically, conventionally, at least back in the day, back in the day is, a whole different technology ago. Price to sales around four would be considered kind of high for a tech hardware company. AMD is almost 12, but at least it's less than half of that of Nvidia. So once I saw that, I'm all good. That means, at least to me, that there could be some additional upside just from what's called re-rating on the valuation. So there could be some valuation or multiple expansion ahead for AMD as investors in the market get more excited about this deal. Now, I also took a look at, now you can't just look at valuation without looking at things like revenue and earnings growth, because that gives you context for the valuation. And this again is from Seeking Alpha. And according to the estimated price to earnings ratio based on consensus earnings estimates, AMD will finally get to a market multiple, which I think the market meaning S&P 500 is around 16, maybe it's 18. Don't quote me on that. But AMD is finally going to get to that market multiple in about 3 years, 2020. And I believe the earnings estimates now incorporate analysts' best guess on this OpenAI deal, but I'm not entirely sure. And if you don't believe the PE ratio, then you can just look at if you don't have enough context for what the analysts are saying, you can just look at the estimated growth rates. The specific growth rates are only 18% for this year, but in subsequent years, they are very good. 58% for 2026 and 37% or 38, let's just call it 37% for the 2 years after that. So pretty strong growth. This again helped to alleviate any of my concerns on valuation. Finally, regardless of any of these ratios, what I have started doing in recent months, maybe I started maybe at earlier this year, is looking at what's called the free cash flow ratio. Now, the free cash flow ratio is something that talks about the health of the balance sheet of a company. And oftentimes it could be a stronger indicator of the value of a company than all those other ratios. And that's because we want to know for every dollar, and that's revenue, but for every dollar that the company earns, how much free cash flow is it throwing out of the business. And free cash flow is a measure of how, what is the company's ability to generate hard currency, hard cash when it does its operations. So we want it to be positive. That's a start. And we also like to see this free cash flow margin increasing because that means the company's value is increasing. And this chart shows that fortunately AMD is coming off of a trough in 2024 past 10-year chart and is actually trending up. And hopefully it can get back to the former peak and continue higher from there thanks to this OpenAI deal. So this was on the valuation. This chart was a clincher for me. I became much more comfortable with AMD's valuation. Okay, I promised to go into the technicals in more detail. So here it is. Again, quick review on the overall price action. Let's zoom in. So what I'm zooming in here is the last, say, month and a half of the price action. This is called a candlestick chart. You can see at the very bottom, the 50-day moving average breakdown that first got me concerned about the price action. And again, the 50-day moving average is that red line. It's an important trend line. It measures the average of the last 50 days of prices. And fortunately, it's trending up. So we always want our trend lines to trend up because that means the price is also trending upward. Now, zoom in to the price, the recent price action of the last 3 days. So this is called a gap and crap. Let me explain. So on the OpenAI deal news, AMD gapped higher to it opened at $226 per share, and then it faded into what's called a crap. And it closed much lower, in this case, 10% lower. That's a pretty heavy selling burden. Closed at $203 at the end of the day. So that meant the stock opened and people just rushed in to sell their shares. And we got a gap and then a crap. And you could think of this as a gap, excitement, oh crap, concern. Fortunately, the next day we had another gap up and the stock held its own. I think it gained around 3% on the strength of Jeffries upgrading from hold to buy and a $300 price target. So, phew, thank goodness, right? And then even better today, this is now October 8th that I'm talking. AMD soared. I think this is another 13% on a swath of additional upgrades. I saw some additional analysts rushing to get off the fence with their hold ratings and issue their buy ratings. So this is what we want to see. Analysts are going from bearish, essentially bearish, to bullish. And that's going to add fresh momentum to the price action and to the prospects for future price appreciation in AMD. So taken together, with the valuation and the technicals, I'm more comfortable now holding AMD. Now, the other great thing about this technical setup is it gives a very clear line below which I would finally just go ahead and take profit. So if AMD were to somehow close below $203, that would confirm a sentiment shift and potential lower prices to come. Given again the valuation and now the price action and the technicals and the analyst upgrades, I'm much more comfortable saying I don't expect such a thing to happen at least anytime soon, unless there's some, of course, exogenous event that's completely unexpected and a surprise, negative surprise. Now, why even be concerned about all this price action? Well, I have a very recent example, which is Oracle. Oracle also had big news, 36% gain after posting earnings, and it also went to a new all-time high based on that news. OpenAI turned out to be at the center of that. I honestly am a little concerned that OpenAI is the center of a lot of the biggest dollars that are being dropped in the AI universe, but it is what it is. Now, notice what happened with Oracle. Big 36% post-earnings gain, but it couldn't push higher from there. In fact, sellers, they didn't really sell hard on the earnings, the first post-earnings day, but they sold hard the next 2 days. And that is what we call buyer exhaustion after big positive news. It means that pretty much all the motivated buyers had already moved into the stock. After about a week and a half, Oracle did make an attempted rebound, but it stopped cold at its all-time high, and then sellers took over again. This is an example of why it is important to pay attention to the technicals as well as the fundamentals of a stock, because the technicals told you everything you need to know about buyer exhaustion and that Oracle was going to be biased lower. And sure enough, it's now struggling between its 20-day moving average, which is the dotted line, and the 50-day moving average, which is again the red line. Now, I'm not bearish on Oracle. In fact, I have a call spread on Oracle because I do expect a rebound to sustain at some point. But this is what buyer exhaustion looks like, and this is what I was afraid could happen to AMD, although it would have been even more precarious for AMD because the profit takers jumped right into the fray right from the beginning. All right, so having said all of that, I'm now, as I sit here thinking about my position in AMD, I've decided I'm going to hold the stock, so I'm all good now. But I am going to be watching. I'm going to stay vigilant because the deal details still are unclear. Sorry, there's still more details to come for the deal, and we have execution that we want to see. And then finally, I'll be waiting on the stock and hoping during this waiting period, it biases higher rather than lower. All right, this is Dr. Duru from AHA Analytics. Thanks for checking this out. Again, reminder to subscribe to this channel if you want more content like this, and I will check you out the next